because he sees his own interest as more important than his country's interest, than America's interest. And because his bruised ego matters more to him than our democracy or our Constitution, he can't accept he lost.
Good morning and welcome to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, January 8th, 2022. Jesus, man, I can't believe it. We made it through the holidays and we're so thankful to be back with you guys today. Thanks for joining us and thanks for the folks who've been along with us for the ride. You know, this program started because of COVID-19. We were not sure what we're going to be able to do in terms of the program that Val Atkinson and I do on the radio called Connections, which is on Sundays on Foxy 107, 104 in the Raleigh-Durham market. And also, if you go to foxync.com, you can stream it from anywhere in the world. And we couldn't go into the station. Everything was going into lockdown. So we started doing this on Saturdays to try to give another take on a lot of the topics that we talk about, but also to maybe broaden it out a little bit more. So where we are right now is that, you know, the country is still fighting COVID. We are coming off of the anniversary of 1/6, and you saw in the opening there, Joe Biden, I think his strongest rebuke of Donald Trump and what happened on 1/6, and finally saying that Donald Trump, hey, you lost. This is over. I do want to, before we get started, before I bring Val Atkinson in, I want to play a clip of also the Vice President Kamala Harris.
They were and what they were doing when our democracy came under assault. Dates that occupy not only a place on our calendars, but a place in our collective memory. December 7th, 1941, September 11th, 2001, and January 6th, 2021. On that day, I was not only Vice President-elect, I was also a United States Senator. And I was here at the Capitol that morning at a classified hearing with fellow members of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Hours later, the gates of the Capitol were breached. I had left, but my thoughts immediately turned not only to my colleagues, but to my staff.
One of the things that strikes me is, Val, is that there are people like Ted Cruz who were excoriated by Donald Trump in the run-up to his election, and then those people became Trump sycophants. I want you to look at a clip of Ted Cruz on the Tucker Carlson show and explain to me why someone like Ted Cruz is kowtowing to Donald Trump.
So we played this tape for you last night. We were surprised by it. We prefaced it by saying every conservative appreciates Ted Cruz because he's one of the smartest and most articulate people in the Congress, and he's conservative. But he referred publicly to what happened on January 6th as, quote, a violent terror attack. Here it is.
We are approaching a solemn anniversary this week, and it is an anniversary of a violent terrorist attack on the Capitol.
So I guess what I mean, there are a lot of dumb people in the Congress. You're not one of them. I think you're smarter than I am. And you never use words carelessly. And yet you called this a terror attack when by no definition was it a terror attack. That's a lie. You told that lie on purpose, and I'm wondering why you did.
Well, Tucker, thank you for having me on. When you aired your episode last night, I sent you a text shortly thereafter and said, listen, I'd like to go on because the way I phrased things yesterday, it was sloppy and it was frankly dumb. And
I don't buy that. Whoa. I don't buy that. Look, I've known you a long time, since before you went to the Senate. You were a Supreme Court contender. You take words as seriously as any man who's ever served in the Senate. And every word you repeated that phrase. I do not believe that you used that accidentally. I just don't.
So Val, Tucker Carlson plays a clip. Ted Cruz says that 1/6 was an insurrection, and the people who breached the Capitol should be treated like terrorists, that they, did damage to cops and whatever. And then he calls Tucker Carlson, backtracks on everything he says, and wants to take back what he said. Is it possible that Donald Trump really does have that much sway and control over people to the point where they're terrified to even criticize anything that happened on 1/6?
Well, just looking at Ted Cruz as an example here, anybody who would allow someone to talk about their wife, as he allowed Donald Trump to do, and to accuse his father of being a part of the assassination of President Kennedy, and do nothing about it. Really, I can't put the standards of normality on him for anything. So if he'll do that, he'll do anything. So there's no need in trying to figure that out. He did it. He's a crazy guy. He's one of the people who we need to take power away from and see that he never gets it again. And we kind of try to move on from that. One of the things that's very difficult, and I don't think we're doing a very good job at, is trying to show that, what I call that mythical middle, that these guys on the other side are crazy, that there's something wrong with them, and they are not logical, and they need to be left alone and just allowed to go to their own demise by themselves or whatever. It's like what you and I talk about all the time, Ed. It's like a guy standing up in the middle of the floor and saying, I believe 1 and 1 equals 3. And you say, this guy's crazy. And he said, no, I believe that. And you tell him, no, it's 2. And you come back 3 hours later, and the guy is still trying to argue to prove people that 1 and 1 and 2. My question would be, who's the idiot here? Who's really the idiot? Because this guy's taken over the conversation. He's got you arguing about something that everybody already knows and had accepted as fact. And he's got you trying to prove that it ain't. So he's controlling the conversation. He's controlling things. And I think we'll be probably freer, if that's the proper word, once we look at guys like Ted Cruz and say, the idiot does not deserve our attention, our concentration, or anything else. We need to be putting time and attention into getting rid of him, doing whatever we can to make him go away. And we haven't done a real good job at that. Most of them have not. I'm proud to say that you and I have, because we know how to handle that guy. But Ted Cruz is one of those guys that has no principles, no values, no tenets, no anything except being reelected. And he has determined that if he gets on the wrong side of Donald Trump, he cannot win a primary race. And if you can't win a primary, you can't win the general election. So that explains what he does. And how he does it, for what reason, is untenable. You can't explain it away. You can't make any sense out of it. That's just who and what he is. And why? I don't care. I just know 1 and 1 or 2. And I'm not going to argue with him that whether it's 3 or not. He can do what he wants to do about that.
Well, Ted Cruz, irrespective of him and the rest of the idiots in the Congress that we have to deal with, real people still believe some of this nonsense, Val, the QAnon people and everything else. And all of this is being driven by the big lie. I think everybody's settled on that as the term to call it, which is that the election of Joe Biden was somehow illegitimate and that the vote should not have counted, and that there was this whole inner working. 1/6 is just one day. It actually started well before 1/6, where they had people at the White House, they had people there in Washington trying to figure out how to get Mike Pence to not certify the election. This is what this all stems from. And one of the things is that places like Arizona, those votes should not have counted. I want to play a clip real quick about the cyber ninjas, and we'll talk about that.
A lawyer for Cyber Ninjas, the contractor behind Arizona's partisan election review, says the company is bankrupt. Just as an Arizona judge rules, the contractor will be fined $50,000 a day if it doesn't turn over public records related to the Republican review. Maricopa County Superior Court Judge John Hanna says former Cyber Ninja CEO Doug Logan could face individual fines, saying, quote, "The court is not going to accept the assertion that Cyber Ninjas is an empty shell and that no one is responsible for seeing that it complies." That would also extend to Cyber Ninja's attorney, Jack Walenchik, who wants to quit. He says he hasn't been paid, but maintains Cyber Ninjas is not subject to the Arizona Public Records Law because it's a private company.
So, Val, the Cyber Ninjas say they have no money, and the company's dissolved. And the reason why this is important is because they were given the ballots from the election, and they were supposedly auditing those ballots. And now the company's supposedly belly up, and they can't turn that stuff back over to the state of Arizona. So now all of that's up in the air. And for me, this is the problem of these so-called audits that were going on, or people wanted to have done, by hiring these people who have no skill and ability to do it, one, and two, there was no reason to do it. And I think the big play going into the next election is to put people in place to do just what the Cyber Ninjas do, which is cloudy, muddy the water, throw these elections into state houses or even into the Congress, to give people like Donald Trump, who can't win legitimately, a leg up. Can you talk to me about the danger of messing with the electoral process?
Well, without the electoral process, there is no democracy. We know that. Their strategy, meaning the Tea Party and the Trumpers and all of those folks, has always been to create doubt in the mind, of Americans that the system will work, or that it is working fairly. And the more we hear about that, the more some people question it. And we have that group of people within our society who want to be fair, and they want to give both sides an equal opportunity to be heard. And they'll listen. And these are the people, they are fodder to these two groups I'm talking about, the Tea Party and the 1%ers and 3%ers and the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, whatever, QAnon. They need these kinds of people to say, tell me more, I don't know yet, prove it, show it, prove to me that the election was not stolen. Trying to prove a negative there. And some of us are falling right into it, trying to prove that you can't do that. You can't prove a negative. So they continue to do that because they feel it's a part of their strategy to sow doubt and to create contention. And in doing so, they build other cyber ninja groups to come forth the next time to say there's problems here. We can't use these ballots because they've been solved, they've been turned over, they're no longer credible. And so the whole election has to be thrown out. This is what our good friend Eric Dorner talks about all the time when he talks about elections at the state and local levels, why they are so important. is because that's when the real decisions are made as to how are you going to manage and administer this thing called democracy. Are you going to allow a small group of people to determine whether a small group of partisan people to determine whether the outcome of the election was fair or not? If you do that, the people might as well not vote. It doesn't matter, because this little small partisan group over here is going to say, well, if candidate A doesn't win, it was fixed. Why? Because candidate A said so before the election. So if candidate A wins, then everything is fine. If candidate B wins, it was fixed, and we got to throw that out and award the election to candidate A. And the dullest knife in the drawer can look through that and tell you don't have a democracy anymore. So let's stop playing games about it and stop pretending. And that's when I think the weaker side of our nation will probably stand up and say, you know, we should have done something about this a long time ago. No, you were back arguing whether 1 and 1 was actually 2. That's why you didn't do anything about it. You're trying to convince people in the middle, that mythical middle, to come over to your side. And the other side was reloading and reloading their guns and firing at you all the while when you're trying to convince people that 1 and 1 are 2. So, and now we're here and it's time to fight, but they got all of the power. And now if you fight, it's going to be a crime and they're going to put you in jail.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, and that may be a good place for us to break this conversation, because when in the next segment, and I don't want to be hyperbolic, Val, but we are in dangerous territory. There are people who have talked about civil war and that kind of thing. There are rallies that go on where they ask, you know, when do we get to use our guns? You know, and those people who showed up on 1/6, some of them had bombs, some of them had guns. They attacked legislators. They said hang Mike Pence. They were looking for Nancy Pelosi. They stole sensitive documents. They desecrated the Capitol building. So I do want to talk about that when we come back from the break. But before we leave, I do want to bring up something. Sidney Poitier passed away this week, and we're men of a certain age, Val, where Sidney Poitier was very important to us because the first brother to win an Oscar. He was in movies. He was Mr. Tibbs. And all kind of things. Talk to me real quick about the importance of Sidney Poitier before we take this break.
Sidney Poitier was a hero. He was a legend in my time growing up, watching movies like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and a lot of the other ones that you just mentioned. But some of the few movies that didn't get the acclaim and glory that those did were movies like Buck and the Preacher, where he and Harry Belafonte starred in a Western, and that was unheard of for African Americans, not only to star, but in a Western where you got to ride horses and do those things that they had told you that only white people do well. So this guy was multi-talented. He was good, but I think the thing that impressed me most, that I liked most about Sidney Poitier, was the fact that he did things his own way. He did not compromise in order to succeed. He said he wanted to play a particular role a certain way, like in Mr. Tibbs, slapping the white guy slapping him and he's slapping him back. That wasn't supposed to be a part of the original scene. And Poitier said, I wanted to be that way. I wanted to show that the new black man is not submissive anymore. And so I like that about him, that he went beyond just the scripts and just his role and to be on the big screen. And he did a lot of things off the big screen too, Ed, as you're aware. he and Harry Belafonte was about the Mississippi Freedom Riders and funding that movement and doing many things that they could to raise money in the North, providing themselves all over the scope of things to make sure that that movement caught fire and did what it did. They know that they could not go and ride on the bus themselves in those kinds of freedom rides, but they could do what they could do. And I really, he was a big hero for me, and I'm glad that people are recognizing his work.
Yeah, indeed. So we're going to take a break. On the way out, you're going to see Sidney Poitier, who's going to be talking about him winning the Oscar. And then we'll be right back, and we're going to talk about the danger of I don't even know if it's the Republican Party anymore, Val, but the danger of these people who may push us into armed conflict. So we'll be back after this message.
The receipt of the Oscar. There is no honor in the motion picture business that exemplifies all the things that one could possibly reach for.
Because it is a long journey to this moment, I am naturally indebted to countless numbers of people, principally among whom are Ralph Nelson, James Poe, William Barrett, Martin Baum, and of course the members of the Academy. For all of them, all I can say is a very special thank you.
It was amazing. It was amazing, 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 amazing.
It wasn't the poorest countries that were at the highest risk of conflict or the most unequal or the most ethnically or religiously heterogeneous, even the most repressive. It was living in a partial democracy that made citizens more likely to pick up a gun and begin to fight. No sweat, right?
And welcome back to our second segment of the deal. I'm your Jose Clark. That's Val Atkinson. We ended up the segment talking about Sidney Poitier because his seminal figure not only in cinema and film, which I love. I'm a cinephile. I love movies, particularly old movies. And Sidney Poitier movies are stunning from a lot of standpoints for Black men of our age, Val, because you saw people like Sidney Poitier, and you mentioned Harry Belafonte and people like that doing things that Black men could not do out in normal society. You could not slap a white man. You could not play the cowboy in the movies and all that stuff. And they forced those roles to happen. And I think they are the progenitors of Denzel Washingtons and people like that. So without Sidney Poitier, you don't have Denzel. Anyway, the clip you saw coming back in was of Mahdi Hassan and his show on Peacock Network. And he had a clip up there, Val, and he was talking about how civil wars start. I hate to even go here. You know, we try to not be hyperbolic, right? We try not, because I avoided for the longest time talking about fascism as it related to Donald Trump. And not wanting to do the comparisons with Mussolini and Hitler and Donald Trump. But the fact is that we are in a territory where there were, I don't care if it was two people, there were people dumb enough to show up on 1/6 at the Capitol thinking that they were going to force Donald Trump back into office some kind of way. And that is a very short leap from taking up arms. So I'm going to ask you to go back to late 1850s with me. I wasn't there. You weren't there. We were close. But take me back to the time of these know-nothings, right? The people who would eventually push us into the Civil War, the people who wanted the South to be free to keep Negroes as slaves, the people who wanted to keep all the institutions that they had, regardless of whether or not it was good for the whole, group of people that we call Americans, right? We have a similar group of people now who are know-nothings, who don't want to take the vaccine. And they constantly talk about immigrants and all that kind of stuff. Can you draw any parallel from the late 1850s to now, Val? Put on your professor hat.
Yes, it's one of my favorite hats to put on, to talk about the parallels and to make people be aware that we are not so far removed from the repeat of history as it was played out from 1850, really right on through Reconstruction. I'd like to take a plug for a particular book by John Ashworth. He has a 2-volume set, and it is entitled Slavery, Capitalism, and Politics in the Antebellum Republic. And the first volume goes from 1820 to 1850, when they talked about commerce and compromise. And then the next volume goes from 1850 on throughout the end of the Civil War. And what we find out from these kind of collections that Ashworth came about and put forth is that the Republican Party was non-existent prior to 1854. It was just born in 1854. This is 4 years after the big compromise about how they're going to work things out about slavery and how the states were going to do. So the Republican Party didn't come to effect until 1854. But prior to 1854, there were all of these debates going on, and after 1854, between a guy named Lincoln and Douglas. So people knew where the Republican Party stood. Lincoln was a representative of the Republican Party. And the South, the people in the South that valued slavery, wanted slavery, knew that if this guy, Abraham Lincoln, and the Republicans get in office, we can say bye-bye to slavery. He's going to kill it. So we got to do everything we can to keep this guy out of office. Fast forward a lot to 1860, November of 1860, Lincoln wins the election. And shortly after that, what happens, I think it was December the 20th, is South Carolina decided to secede from the Union. But key here, Ed, is the fact that they didn't decide that on a whim. On the November the 8th or 6th, I think it was, of 1860, when the vote was cast. They knew this is what they wanted to do all along. So they had plans. They were ready to go. They had, there's a book entitled The Apostles of Disunion, where they had commissioners to go out to the various states to convince the various states to join us in our secession. And they were serious about this long before they succeeded. And finally it happened on, I believe it was December the 20th of 1860, they succeeded from the Union. And they began to get other states to follow them. They began to usurp and incorporate and just take over everything that was in the boundaries of this particular state as theirs, including a place called Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The Confederates said, this is ours now. It's no longer yours. And the United States of America did absolutely nothing. As a matter of fact, they acquiesced and turned Fort Sumter officially over to the Confederates on the evening of, or the morning of April the 12th of 1861. When they were fired upon, 30 hours later, they surrendered. They hoisted up the white flag and surrendered Fort Sumter. And then that's when the Civil War started. Lincoln was finally embarrassed and he had to pull up 75,000 troops. Can this kind of thing happen again today? It's already happening. I submit to you. It is already happening, but in a different way. We have people now doing things instead of storming Fort Sumter or firing rounds into it. They're going online, they're doing things. They got TV programs, they're lying to you like you talked about Ted Cruz just a few minutes ago.
Yep.
They're already doing these things. They're storming the Capitol. To me, the storming of the Capitol on 1/6 is the equivalent of firing on Fort Sumter at 4:30 a.m. on April the 12th of 1861.
Yeah.
Same difference.
Same. Look, I want to remind you, you're watching The Deal. I'm Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson. I know you probably think you're in a history class at North Carolina Central University, but no, you're watching The Deal. And it's Saturday, January 22nd, 2022. And we're talking about December 1860 and that whole period. And you're probably going, wait a minute, that's a long time ago. Val, I wrote a piece this week about the speech that the President Biden gave, but I also wanted to frame it in historical context too. On January 6th, 1901, in the Dunn Democrat newspaper in Harnett County, which is where I was born. So about 60 years before I was born, that January 6th edition of the newspaper had two articles on the front page. And they were about the lynching of two Black men. One was in Alabama and one was between Harnett and Sampson County. And in the article, they were matter of fact about how these Black men deserved their punishment. One, the guy in Sampson County was accused of stealing a hog. And the one in Alabama was accused of fighting back against a white man who had hit him first. And in both cases, them being killed was irrelevant to the writer of the article. What mattered was that Negroes stayed in line. And what also mattered is that white men had an obligation to take up arms to defend, in the case of the hog that was stolen supposedly in Sampson County, somebody else's property. This is a long way around to ask you this question. What makes white men think that they can take up arms to defend the property of somebody whose hog was stolen, to kill a man? And in the article, it talked about how the family was told they had 24 hours to get out of Harnett County and never come back to North Carolina. What emboldens people to think they can attack the Capitol to put Donald Trump back into office, but also to protect this woman's hog that was supposedly stolen? Doesn't that come from this notion that's been here the whole time, that white men have ultimate authority to use violence and force to get what they want?
It does, Ed, and it's also rooted in the notion of policing in America, where it all started with the average citizen having a responsibility to save the entire community against Indian revolts, slave revolts, and attacks from anything and anybody. And in many cases, South Carolina being among them, where the Black population was larger than the white population, it was important that you convince people of color to manage themselves, because you didn't have enough white people to do it properly. So you had to do things to convince them that it was almost impossible and stupid and crazy to go against the rules set up by these white guys, okay? So you made example out of people, and you hung them from trees, and you set them on fire even after they were dead, and all of these crazy things. That was the purpose, to convince Black folks to know their places and stay in them. And that same thing was playing out in the case of the Michaels when they tracked down Ahmaud Arbery and killed him in cold blood. It was the same thing, protecting the property. You talk about the hog that was being protected 60 years before your birth. It's the same thing. These guys were protecting property of people they didn't even know.
They didn't even know.
They didn't even know.
That's a good point. Hold it right there. Let's play a clip from the judge in the sentencing of the McMichaels. Hold on just a minute.
Let me start with this statement. As we all now know, based upon the verdict that was rendered in this court in November, Ahmaud Arbery was murdered. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy on many, many levels. On February 23rd of 2020, almost 2 years ago, a resident of Glynn County, a graduate of Brunswick High, a son, a brother, a young man with dreams, was gunned down in this community. As we understand it, he left his home apparently to go for a run, and he ended up running for his life. He entered the English home at approximately 1:04 p.m. and left that home at about 1:08 on that day. At 1:14, Greg McMichael calls 911 to let them know that there's a black male running down the street, and within moments, Ahmaud Arbery is shot and killed. The three men that are now before this court chased him in a residential neighborhood for at least 5 minutes in pickup trucks, armed with a shotgun and a .357 revolver. The state mentioned this today about the time period, but I do want to put that time period in context. And the only way I could think to do so may be a little theatrical, but I think it's appropriate. I want us all to get a concept of time. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit silently for 1 minute.
So Val, there you go. The judge says, you murdered Ahmaud Arbery. You got in a pickup truck, chased him down. You had 2 rifles and a .357 Magnum. You murdered this man, and they got life in prison. How that is a far cry from what I had expected when I first heard this. The second show of the deal, we had the young man who was standing in front of the courthouse every day trying to get people to pay attention to Ahmaud Arbery case. And he's the one who got people to pay attention to get this case to court. And I'm gonna try to go back and find some of that video because the young man was a friend of Ahmaud Arbery. They had gone to high school together. He wanted to know why nobody was paying attention. And then it took 2 years, but it happened, Val. But what I'm afraid of is that there's still too much of this attitude that, like you said, I can defend somebody else's property, but I could also defend Donald Trump's bruised ego. That they fight very hard for Donald Trump's bruised ego and will try to put him back in the office. Let's square this, because there's a knock-on effect here. You already talked about our pal Herb Joyner saying how important it is to participate in local elections and making sure things happen the way they should happen, that way. But there's a movement afoot, obviously. We're in North Carolina. There's a trial going on right now about the districts that and what they're going to look like ultimately when people go to vote. And there's a lot of shenanigans going on, Val. I want to talk about that, but we're going to be running up on a break. So let's do this. Let's take a break. On the way out, I'll play the video of some of the court, what's going on at the court, and then we'll come back, we'll talk about it. All right, so let's take a break. You're watching The Deal. We'll be back in just a minute.
Were intentionally drawn to entrench Republican dominance in North Carolina's congressional delegation. and in both chambers of the General Assembly.
An attorney for Republican legislators tried to undercut the various experts who testified and found that the maps they drew were meant to benefit Republicans and make it harder for Democrats to take power.
When I think of these simulation experts, I think about the Wizard of Oz. And then what you learned was that the Wizard of Oz was nothing more than a man behind the curtain.
Republicans have said this was the most transparent process in state history. However, we learned in the trial that Representative Dustin Hall looked at so-called concept maps behind closed doors before going into the public room and drawing the districts for the state house.
Maps that were never disclosed, maps that have since been destroyed. We'll never see them.
Hall said he viewed them for a matter of seconds, but drew the maps he wanted.
This is just simply the hallmark of a weak case. Ignore the actual legislative record, ignore the actual maps, and focus on the shiny, irrelevant object in the corner.
And welcome back to our third and final segment of The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson. A very spirited show today. A lot to talk about. When we took the break, on the way out, you saw a clip of the proceedings going on in court in North Carolina. A special panel of judges is hearing arguments over whether or not the congressional districts and well, if the districts period in North Carolina were drawn fairly. Val Atkinson, we have a buddy, Herb Joyner, that we do a show called Connections with, and I'll encourage people to listen to the show Sunday, January 9th. Herb is going to be on there. We're going to be talking about this issue in a little more detail. But in the meantime, he's fond of saying that there's shenanigans going on, Val. Talk to me about the shenanigans that are going on in North Carolina and why it's important that we pay attention to what this three-judge panel decides.
It's all around the whole notion of redistricting. And Republicans hold the majority in both houses of the legislature in North Carolina. And they're about the business of trying to draw the maps based on the 2020 census. And people think there's some shenanigans going on that is supposed to be open to the public, the whole process. And they are finding out that one of the members went to the back room by himself without anybody knowing anything and rigged the drawings and did some other things, and then came out to try to pretend that he's starting afresh and everybody can participate in it. Right now, if they have their way, Ed, North Carolina will move from 13 congressional districts to 14, 13 House districts to 14. Right now, today, we have 5 Democrats holding office. We're 9 and we're, what's that, 8 and 5 today. So once the Republicans redistrict, it looks like right now, unabated, they would move up to 11 and 3. That's because we've gained 1 district through population. And that population has come basically from an increase in Black and brown people. But yet and still, Republicans, who is predominantly a white political organization, they get the spoils of that and go from 8 and 5 to 11 and 3. And that's the bad part about redistricting. That's the shenanigans that Jonah is talking about. So something's got to be done about that. A 3-judge panel is going to be making a decision on that. We'll hear from them coming up real soon on what their decision is about whether or not this redistricting process that went on in North Carolina was fair and done properly and under all of the rules and laws pertinent to that process. So we're going to see what happens with that. But there's no way that with the population the way it is, that Republicans who make up 30% or less of the population of the state of North Carolina should hold 11 of the 14 House seats for the congressional delegation.
Yeah, so Val, here's the other problem. A friend of this program and of Connections, G.K. Butterfield, who is a representative right now, will not be. He's announced his retirement. And we've talked about it here on this program, but I don't know if people realize how bad that is. Not only is he a voice for African Americans, but he's a voice for folks in Eastern North Carolina. What you might get will probably not be the same kind of effective legislator that you got from the G.K. Butterfield, and you certainly won't get a Black person. So the fallout from this is much worse for Black folks who live in Eastern North Carolina. You lose a voice in representation. I have slim hope that this 3-judge panel will do the right thing and force this to go back. But I still think the Republicans still are going to have an advantage. You talk about this often, Val. There's other court cases that said it's okay to do political gerrymandering, right? Haven't we seen this recently from the Supreme Court at the national level? Have they not allowed some of this?
The case that you're talking about, Ed, is Chiavallo versus Washington, where the court basically was taking up an issue involving gerrymandering. And the outcome of that particular case was that racial gerrymandering is unconstitutional, but it allowed partisan or political gerrymandering to stay in effect, to say it's okay for a party to gerrymander its own advantage into the redistricting process, as long as it does not have racial overtones. So that's what they're trying to work through and skirt the corners on. They're trying to use race to determine how to draw the lines, but make it look as if they did not use race to draw the lines.
Yeah, so we know that they did. I'm sure those maps that no longer exist, that we can't see anymore because they were destroyed and they claim they only looked at for a few seconds, right? That we know that those maps probably had everything to do with race. And the reason why they are in the dustbin of history is because they didn't want anybody to know that what they were doing, that they were considering race. So Val, I'm trying to figure out then, we still don't have any movement forward on HR1 and HR4 at the national level. They've passed the House. And so real quick, I would like for you to explain what HR1 and HR4 are. And then the second part of that is, can you talk to me about why in the Senate, we're still having to depend on Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to do the right thing? They didn't do the right thing on the Build Back Better. Should we even have a slightest expectation they'll do right about this?
Well, your last question first, no. I would not devise a strategy that depended upon Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to do the right thing. If you do that, you really don't have a strategy, because the success of the strategy is not in your hands, but in somebody else's hand. And any good HR person will tell you that should not be a performance expectation at all if it's not in the hands of the employee. So no, you shouldn't even bring them up. You should assume that they're going to be against this and go forth and develop a strategy based on that opposition that you expect to get from them. But your first question had to do with what is this HR1 and HR4? Now, if I could take a second, it's only one sentence long for one, and I think 2 sentences long for 2. So let's go with that right now. HR1 says, an act to expand America's access to the ballot box, reduce the influence of big money in politics, strengthen ethics rules for public servants, and implement other anti-corruption measures for the purpose of fortifying our democracy and for other purposes. That's HR1. HR4 says This bill establishes new criteria for determining which states and political subdivisions must obtain pre-clearance before changes to voting practices may take effect. Pre-clearance is the process of receiving pre-approval from the Department of Justice or the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia before making legal changes that would affect voting rights. And if I could go on just a second further, a state and all of its political subdivisions shall be subject to pre-clearance of voting practices changes for a 10-year period if 15 or more voting rights violations occurred in the state during the previous 25 years, 10 or more violations occurred during the previous 25 years, at least one of which was committed by the state itself, or 3 or more violations occurred during the previous 25 years and the state administers the election. This HR 4 is a direct response from the Supreme Court decision of Shelby County versus Holder, where this 1965 Voting Rights Act was actually gutted. And during the gutting of that and the response, one of the things that people don't talk about enough, in my opinion, is the fact that the court said that the Congress should rewrite Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. And Section 4 said which state or subdivision came under the control or the auspices of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And that was based, the old Section 4 was based on what was your voting registration and voting numbers in 1964. So what the Supreme Court is saying, rewrite that and have it to be more relevant, because some states that were awful in 64 have gotten a little better now. Some people that were not so bad in 64 may be horrible now, so it's not relevant. And to a degree, they stumble up against something that is hard to argue against. But that's what HR 4 is doing. It is trying to do what the Supreme Court asked them to do and rewrite the whole pre-clearance deal so that we can reinstitute the 1965 Voting Rights Act.
Yeah, you know, Val, we started the program way back in this hour talking about the idiot who claimed that we have voting problems that need to be rectified by putting him back into office, Donald Trump. He says that there's widespread voter fraud, and then all these laws that are draconian voting laws that are being passed, not laws to make it more accessible or easier to vote, is what we should be doing, right? You should be having these fake audits like the cyber ninjas. You should be banning people passing out water for people standing in line. You should reduce the number of days to vote. You should not have weekend voting. You shouldn't make it, you know, drive-through voting, any of those kind of things that would help people to participate in democracy. We've talked a lot today on the program about how this assault against democracy, the assault against voting is really what's causing us the problem. Now, I want to play a clip real quick. This is Jen Psaki, who is the press secretary for the president, talking about what he plans to do in the coming week.
Will President Biden's case for voting rights legislation be any different than the many arguments we've heard him make before in favor of that legislation?
Well, he has made many arguments in favor of voting rights legislation before. Now, he is going to be delivering this speech at a time where it is going to be under active discussion and debate in the Senate, which is an important component, and in the week leading up to Martin Luther King Day, which is an important moment to remember and recognize many of the sacrifices that important leaders in our history have made. I will say he's going to Georgia because Georgia is one of the many states where corrupt acts on the constitutional right to vote and the integrity of elections have taken place based on the big lie. It was also pivotal to the civil rights movement. It's important to underline that while these un-American efforts efforts are being driven by the big lie. They're also in line with some of the worst episodes of the past. But what I think you will hear him say, and the Vice President, of course, talk about as well, is about the urgent need to pass legislation to protect the constitutional right to vote and the integrity of our elections. He'll talk about the specifics, and he's very focused on people in the country understanding and knowing what is in this legislation. Why is it so important to pass these pieces of legislation? What is at risk? What needs to be protected? And I think you'll hear him talk about that. And he also wants to, of course, restore the Senate working, which is not happening right now, as is evidenced by the fact that they have blocked even the ability to vote on voting rights legislation 4 times. So he'll outline all of that, but he will make a passionate case, as he has made, as you said, in the past, for why we need to move forward with voting rights legislation.
Okay, Val. So Joe Biden's going to go to Georgia. He's going to make some more speeches. He's going to talk about H.R. 1, H.R. 4, the need to do something about voting. He's going to Georgia specifically because it makes sense, historically, tying it to Martin Luther King and King Day and all that kind of thing. Let's talk about realism here.
Yeah.
There are people who have been able to get people on school boards, so we won't talk about history. I won't say critical race theory, because we never were talking about that in elementary school, right? They don't want you to learn history. And today, I've been trying to focus a lot on history. In my piece this week, I've been trying to focus a lot on history. We've talked a lot about the historical linkage between late 1850s to today. We've talked about the possibility of civil war in terms of history, because we're set up in a way, with people divided the way they are, that we could launch into this. I guess my question, Val, is what kind of hope do we have if we're still having to sit here and give people basic elementary historical facts about how voting has been suppressed, how we got to the Civil War, how we were still lynching people in 1901 in Harnett County over hogs. I mean, and people don't know any of that stuff. And we're having to try to do it now. What hope do we have, Val, to get H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 passed?
Well, getting back to what you said earlier, Ed, the passage of H.R. 1 and 4 really have to do with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. HR stands for House, House of Representatives. These bills came from the House. They have to now be passed by the Senate. It has to be a SB 1, SB 4, whatever the number happens to be. And that's where you got to go through Manchin and Sinema. And if you don't do that, you got problems. So what we need to do is we need to make, instead of going out making another speech about how important HR 1 and HR 4, or I already know that. Why are you telling me that, okay? You need to be figuring out what is your strategy under the assumption that you don't have support from Manchin and Sinema. Talk to me about that. Or you don't have to talk to me about that, just go do it. Put it in effect. But that's what you need to be doing, because going out telling me about 4 and 1 is like you are coming up to me, you are EMS, EMT kind of guy, saying, man, you're losing a lot of blood. I know you're painted, my goodness, your pulse is way down. Does that hurt? Look, why are you telling me about a condition I already know about? I want you to fix it, okay? And stop telling me about it, and that's what we got to stop doing as Democrats. You're telling people who are suffering, oh man, you are bleeding bad.
Yeah.
Oh man, your head is half open, man. Hey man, it's horrible. This terrible. You must be painting horrible. I know that. Can you help me?
Can you help me? Well, look, Val, but before we run out of time, we got to talk about one other thing, and that's Omicron and COVID-19 in general. Play a clip real quick, and then we'll talk about it.
It's the biggest mystery with Omicron into this weekend. think really it circles around the issue of why this virus seems to be so much more transmissible. Certainly, it has mutations that can invade some of the immune responses that vaccines give you, but it really does seem like this virus is spreading better than other variants for other reasons. And right now we don't really understand what that is, but certainly it seems like people are getting infected in conditions that previously were highly unlikely to mediate infection, and that's fueling this massive surge of cases. Transmission is something that's really difficult to study in a laboratory, but it really is one of the things that Omicron is doing fantastically better than any previous variant we've seen.
So, Val, that is professor from Johns Hopkins who was talking to Bloomberg there, saying that Omicron is a problematic because we can't figure out how it spread so fast compared to Delta. That this thing is out of control. ERs are full, ICUs are full, testing is a problem. We haven't been able to get a hold of that. Yesterday it was announced that 500 million test kits are going to go out with the help of the Postal Service and some other agencies. I've given up on certain folks, Val. We talk about it here. I've been boosted. You've been boosted. Whenever the next booster comes, I'm going to get it. There's some people that are just rational and some people who are not rational. Kyrie Irving, Djokovic on the tennis side. Aaron Rodgers. I don't have time for them anymore, Val. I'm tired of seeing the stories about people who are on the right, talk show hosts, right-wing religious folks or whatever, who are on their deathbed and then say, I wish I had gotten, and then they set up a GoFundMe page. I'm not contributing to your GoFundMe page. I'm not. You caused this. We are 2 years into, and as I stated at the beginning of the program, this program started because of COVID, because we weren't sure what we were going to be able to do with our regular show, Val. Real quick, COVID, where are we? What's going to happen in the next couple of weeks? I know a lot of people are going to die.
Yeah, a lot of people are going to die. Unfortunately, we don't have the control over COVID that we would love to have. And in the meantime, we need to follow the advice of the experts, the professionals, the scientists. When they say we need to continue to mask, we need to continue to get vaccinated. And when they say these things, to me, the most important one is vaccination. It hurts to know or to hear that some of our leaders, some of our social leaders are doing things that would give really attention and credibility to those who would not participate in recognizing the horror of this disease. It is unbelievable that people like Kyrie Irving and Aaron Rodgers would allow their following, their base, to believe that it's okay if you don't consider COVID anything more than just a common cold. You don't have to do anything about that, and they're just doing this stuff for control. But when I consider Kyrie Irving's past, and I gotta say, for full disclosure, is that I'm a Duke fan, and Kyrie Irving played his collegiate ball at Duke University. So I can say this, being a Dookie myself, that this guy was a part of, or at least indicated that he may be a part of, the Flat Earth Society. So anything that comes out of his mouth now doesn't surprise me. I mean, people got rid of that flat Earth thing back in the 15th century, way, way back when. Right. And now he's still talking about it. So it doesn't surprise me at all, but it just goes to show you, Ed, how far we've got to go. And actually how uninformed, how gullible, I think is a better word, some Americans are. I think we all need to step back for a minute and deal with that particular notion, the gullibility of the average American. Without the type of gullibility that we have, we wouldn't be in this situation right now with Donald Trump or COVID.
Yeah.
Without a gullible American to allow Trump to proceed and not allow the scientists to get a better hold on COVID.
Yeah.
It's gullible Americans.
You're absolutely right. I'm gonna play one more clip before we wrap this up. This is Justice Sotomayor asking a question in the Supreme Court. I told you I listened to Supreme Court arguments. Listen to this real quick.
1 to 3% of employees will quit. That is significant. Our declarations, Appendix 308, 316.
Counsel, yes, that may be true, but we are now having deaths at an unprecedented amount. Catching COVID keeps people out of the workplace for extraordinary periods of time. And there have been proof in certain industries like the medical industry that when vaccines are mandated, and there's no mandate here for a vaccine, there is a masking mandate, no different than there is when we tell people that if there are sparks flying in the workplace where workers have to wear a mask. So that's no different in my mind than this. So this is not a vaccine mandate. There are costs and deaths and other things countervailing to the fact that there might be 1 to 3% of workers who leave.
So Val, that's Missouri versus Joe Biden. State of Missouri doesn't want to put in mandates, which is to your point, which is the only way we're going to get our way out of this, which it speaks to the piece that I wrote the week before, which is about wear a damn mask, period. Stop it. Stop it. You're killing people. You're killing people. I know people who are sick right now. I know people who have died. I know people who are in very serious condition right now because of Omicron. And I need for people to do better. Look, man, we're running out of time here. So as I always do, since we talked about all this bad stuff, tell me something good. What I got to look forward to in the next week, Val?
Well, the biggest thing is tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock on Radio 1, Foxy 107, 104, we have our 1502 session. The 1502nd edition of Connections will air. And you are on there along with Herb Jonah and myself. And we're talking about, believe it or not so many things unsimilar to what we've been talking about here today. So all of that and more on tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Please tune in, folks. I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to that tomorrow. It's like talking to Herb Jonah. Look, folks, there's a lot of serious things going on. We talk about serious stuff here. We also talk about nonsense here too. But the bottom line is we have got to do better. I know the human condition is something that we've been struggling over since we've been humans, right? That's why there's religions and factions and all kind of stuff, is people trying to answer those tough questions. Guess what? Val has the answer for you. You don't have to go anywhere else. He already told you what you needed to do. So if you come back here on Saturday mornings or on Sunday mornings, listen to Connection, Val's going to tell you exactly what you need to do. We solved your problem. Look, this is the beginning of a new year. We hope everybody had a safe and prosperous holiday season. King Day is next, and make sure that on that day you go out and do something good for somebody. But for the rest of today, go do something good for somebody, and we'll see you next week. Bye.